So I read a quote the other day. I think it was William James. He said, at any given juncture, there are three possible courses of action. There's the right thing to do, there's the wrong thing to do, and there's not doing anything. And he said, obviously, the right thing is the best. The wrong thing is obviously not as good as the right thing, but the wrong thing is far closer to being the right thing than not doing anything. So in other words, if the right thing gets an A+, then not doing anything gets a solid F, and doing the wrong thing gets a B, or maybe even a B+. And this is an extremely profound point, and it eliminates the phenomenon of decision paralysis or analysis paralysis. I don't know if those are exactly synonymous terms, but they're relevantly synonymous, at least in this context. And I'd like to illustrate this in connection with President Reagan and his performance and how it contrasts with that of President Carter. So Jimmy Carter is and was a very smart person. Ronald Reagan was not. But Reagan's performance, though probably not as good as Republican historians make it out to be, his performance was creditable. It was he did a respectable Republican job. Jimmy Carter did not do a good job, but Jimmy Carter is vastly more intelligent than Reagan. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is, what's the explanation? How is this possible? How can a borderline pinhead do a pretty passable job as the chief executive of the world's largest economy? And how is it that somebody who dwarfed him in terms of intellectual ability did such a mediocre job? Well, there is a pretty straightforward explanation. Reagan, and I'm speculating, but I think these are pretty well-founded speculations, so I guess they're not speculations, but don't worry about that. Reagan probably went in there with one idea as to what to do. He went in there with one objective. He probably had some ideas about deregulation or some such. He probably went in there with very simple ideas, and he stuck with them. So there was an objective. Was it a great objective? It was probably not the worst objective. It was probably not the best objective, but it was an objective. And he stuck with it because he didn't have a lot going on in between his ears. He stuck with it, so the country did, in its way, move forward. Not for everybody, but on balance, it did, in its way, move forward. Now, with Carter, he has, and did have, obviously, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, when he was younger, and therefore at least as smart as he is now, he had a lot of intellectual moves. So, and again, I'm speculating, but these are well-founded speculations, he probably vacillated between 35 different ideas, and he probably revised each of those ideas in its turn 35 times. So whatever 35 times 35 is, a pretty large number. So basically, he divided his energies between 1,000 different ideas, as a result of which he didn't pursue any objective. He had 1,000 different objectives and therefore had no objective. And it was because of his capacious intellect that he was able to have so many ideas and that he was able to see any given situation with such high resolution vision that he was not able to focus on the big picture. So the point here is basically that William James is 100% right. So let's suppose that Reagan's conception as to how to manage the country was the wrong one. Well, that may be the case, but it was a conception, and he stuck with it. So he ended up with, a B or a B plus maybe overall. Now let's suppose that of Jimmy Carter's 1,500 different ideas as to how to run the country, one of those ideas was an A plus idea. Well, it doesn't really matter because that idea received only 1,499th or 1/1500th of Jimmy Carter's energy. So in effect, it received none of his energy, so nothing came of it. Basically, William James is right. At any given juncture, move forward. In fact, my making this podcast is an illustration of my attempt to actualize this principle. This is not exactly the most polished podcast, but I did manage to get a point across, And what was the alternative? The alternative was me stewing in a state of decision paralysis. And I have broken that vicious cycle. And now I will send this audio off into eternity and move on to the next project. See you next time.